Doris heard the sound coming from the guest bedroom: laughter, voices, movement, and her blood went cold. She'd hidden her daughters in that room hours ago with one rule: stay silent. Now someone was in there with them. She ran down the hallway, heart slamming against her ribs, pushed open the door, and what she saw shattered everything she thought she knew. Doris Ellison woke up at 4:45 every morning in a cramped apartment in Queens that barely fit the three of them. She'd kiss Ava and Bella while they slept, slip out into the dark, and catch the 5:30 train into Manhattan. By 7, she was unlocking the back entrance to Jake Lambert's penthouse, a cold, silent place that stretched out like a museum, beautiful but empty, like no one really lived there at all. Jake Lambert was a tech billionaire, 46 years old, silver in his hair, eyes that never met yours, a man who'd made his fortune and then disappeared into it. No parties, no guests, no laughter. And one rule he never bent: no children. Not ever. He'd made that clear the day he hired her 2 years ago, his voice quiet but final. "I need silence, Miss Ellison. This is not a place for families." Doris had nodded fast, desperate. She needed that job more than anything. The pay was 3 times what she'd been making, cleaning office buildings enough to give her girls a real chance. Ava and Bella were 4 now, identical twins with bright eyes and loud giggles, the best thing that ever came from a man who didn't stick around. Every morning, Doris left them with Mrs. Chen, the 70-year-old neighbor who watched them for whatever cash Doris could spare. It wasn't ideal, but it worked. Until November 27th, the twins' birthday, Mrs. Chen called at 6 in the morning, her voice weak and shaking. Pneumonia. She couldn't take the girls. Doris stood frozen in her tiny kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, doing the math in her head. Call in sick, lose the day's pay, maybe the job. Take them to her sister's place in Newark, miss the whole shift, definitely lose the job. Or, she looked at Ava and Bella sitting at the table in their matching unicorn pajamas, eating cereal and humming to themselves, and she made a decision that scared her to her core. "Girls," she whispered, forcing a smile, "how would you like to go on a secret adventure with Mama today?" 2 hours later, she was sneaking them through the service elevator of Jake's building, her heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. She settled them in the guest bedroom at the far end of the penthouse, the one Jake never used, the one he probably forgot existed. She gave them coloring books, snacks, tablets with headphones, stuffed animals, everything she could think of, to keep them quiet. "Mama has to work now, okay?" she whispered, kneeling down to their level. "You stay right here, and stay very, very quiet. Like we're playing hide and seek. Can you do that for me?" "Okay, Mama," they whispered back, eyes wide with the thrill of the secret. Doris locked the door from the outside just in case, and went to work with her stomach twisted in knots. Everything was fine. Until 2 in the afternoon. Jake came home early, something he never did, and Doris was in the kitchen when she heard his footsteps heading toward the guest wing. She heard the door handle turn. She heard his voice say something she couldn't make out, and then she heard it, her daughter's voices. She ran. But before we begin, click subscribe, hit like, and tell me where in the world you're watching from. Sometimes God puts people in our path exactly when we need them most, even when we don't see it coming. When Doris burst into that room, she found Jake Lambert frozen in the doorway, staring at 2 identical little girls in red birthday dresses, surrounded by crayons and stuffed animals. Ava looked up at him with her huge brown eyes and said, in the sweetest voice, "Hi, today's our birthday. I'm Ava, and that's Bella. We're 4. Doris couldn't breathe. Her throat closed up, her hands went numb. "Mr. Lambert, I can explain," but he wasn't looking at her. He was staring at the girls like he'd seen a ghost. His face had gone completely white, drained of color. His mouth opened, but no sound came out at first. "How old did you say?" His voice cracked on the last word. 4, Bella chimed in, holding up 4 tiny fingers, proud and oblivious. And then something Doris never expected happened. Jake Lambert's eyes filled with tears. Actual tears. This man who never showed emotion, who walked through his own home like he was made of stone, his face crumpled. He lowered himself slowly to the floor, his expensive suit wrinkling beneath him, and he whispered, barely audible, 4 years old. Doris stood there, paralyzed, watching as he reached out a shaking hand and gently touched Bella's curls. His fingers trembled, his breath hitched. "Mr. Lambert," she ventured, her voice barely a whisper. He looked up at her, and for the first time in 2 years, she actually saw him, not the cold billionaire, not the distant boss. She saw a man drowning in grief, a man so lonely it hurt to look at him, a man who'd built walls so high and so thick that nothing could get through until now. "Don't fire me," Doris whispered, her voice breaking. "Please. I had nowhere else to take them. I didn't know what else to do." "Fire you?" He let out a laugh, broken, rusty, like he'd forgotten how. He shook his head, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "Miss Ellison, He stopped, swallowed hard. "When's their birthday?" "Today, November 27th. He closed his eyes like she'd just stabbed him. When he opened them again, he looked at the girls with something that made Doris's chest tighten. Longing, pain, hope. "Would you like a birthday cake?" he asked softly. Ava and Bella looked at their mother, uncertain. Doris nodded slowly, still not understanding what was happening, still terrified this was some kind of trap. "Yes, please," they said together, grinning. Jake stood up, pulled out his phone, and dialed. His voice was steadier now, controlled. "I need a birthday cake delivered to my penthouse in 1 hour. Make it special. Twin girls, 4 years old. I don't care what it costs. Just make it beautiful." He hung up and looked at Doris. His eyes were red, but his voice was gentle. "I'm sorry. I should have asked first. Is it okay if they stay? Just for today?" Doris didn't know what to say. Her mind was spinning. This didn't make sense. None of it made sense. But she nodded anyway. "Thank you," he whispered. And that's how it started. An hour later, Jake Lambert was kneeling on his living room floor with a 3-tier princess cake covered in pink frosting and edible flowers. Ava and Bella sat across from him, eyes wide with wonder, and he sang "Happy Birthday" so badly, so off-key, that the girls burst into giggles that filled the entire penthouse, a sound that place had never heard before. Doris stood in the doorway, watching her world tilt completely off its axis. The man who never smiled was grinning. The man who hated noise was laughing. The man who wanted nothing to do with children was lighting candles and clapping along with her daughters like this was the best moment of his life. She didn't understand it. She couldn't explain it. But something had shifted, something deep and impossible and terrifying. And as she watched Jake help Bella blow out her candles, as she saw the way his face softened when Ava threw her arms around his neck and said, "Thank you, mister." "Jake," Doris felt something stir in her chest, something she hadn't let herself feel in a long, long time. Hope. The next morning, Doris showed up for work expecting everything to go back to normal. She'd find another babysitter. She'd keep her head down. She'd pretend the birthday party never happened. But when she walked into the kitchen, Jake was already there, leaning against the counter with a cup of coffee in his hand. "Miss Ellison," he said quietly. "About yesterday." Her stomach dropped. "Here it comes. The firing. The speech about boundaries. If you ever need to bring them again," he continued, his voice soft, almost tentative, "you can. Whenever Mrs. Chen can't watch them, they can stay here." Doris blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "I mean it." He looked down at his coffee. "I don't mind. Actually, I'd like that." She didn't know what to say, so she just nodded, throat tight. And that's how it began. Over the next few weeks, Ava and Bella came with her 3, sometimes 4 days a week, and every single day, without fail, Jake would finish his morning calls and disappear into the guest room where the girls were playing. At first, Doris would peek in to check on them, expecting him to look annoyed or out of place. But he never did. He'd be on the floor with them, building block towers or reading picture books in different voices that made them laugh so hard they'd fall over. He taught them how to play chess badly, because they were 4 and had no idea what they were doing. But he was patient and kind and never once checked his phone while he was with them. The cold billionaire she'd worked for was melting right before her eyes. One afternoon, Doris brought him tea while he was reading to the girls, and he looked up at her with a question in his eyes. "How do you do it?" he asked. "Manage everything alone?" She shrugged, setting the cup down. "You just do. You don't have a choice. Their father, gone before they were born." She kept her voice even, factual. "I've been working since I was 14. You learn to survive." He was quiet for a moment. Then, softly, "What do you dream about, if you could have anything?" Doris laughed, surprised by the question. "A home. Nothing fancy, just mine. A place where the walls don't shake when the neighbors fight. Where my girls have their own room. Jake nodded slowly, like he was filing that information away somewhere. He started sharing things too. Small things at first. How the penthouse felt like a prison sometimes. How he'd built this entire life and had no one to share it with. Money fixes everything except the emptiness, he said one evening, staring out at the city lights. It just makes bigger. The girls started calling him Mr. Jake. He'd light up every time they said it, like hearing his name in their voices was the best sound in the world. He brought them books, art supplies, sweets hidden in his coat pockets. One day, he showed up with 2 matching pink scooters with helmets and knee pads. "Mr. Lambert, this is too much," Doris started. "Please," he interrupted, and there was something almost desperate in his voice. "Let me do this. Let me be part of their lives, even just a little." And Doris felt something shift inside her, a flutter in her stomach when he smiled, a warmth in her chest when he asked about her day like he actually cared. She tried to fight it, told herself she was being foolish, that he was her boss, that this couldn't be real. But then he'd look at her, really look at her, and she'd forget every reason why this was impossible. She was starting to believe, starting to hope, starting to imagine a future she'd never let herself dream about. Until the day her sister Rhonda came to visit and saw Jake on the floor with Ava and Bella, all 3 of them laughing like family. Rhonda showed up on a Saturday afternoon without warning, the way sisters do when they're worried. Doris was in the kitchen preparing lunch when the doorbell rang. Jake had taken Ava and Bella to the living room to teach them a card game, and their laughter echoed through the penthouse. Rhonda walked in, set her purse down, and within 30 seconds her eyes found Jake on the floor with the girls. She watched him for a long moment, watched how Ava climbed onto his back, how Bella showed him her drawing, how he smiled at them like they were precious. "Doris," Rhonda said quietly, "we need to talk." They stepped into the hallway, and Rhonda's face was tight with something that looked like fear. "How long has this been going on?" "He's just being kind, Rhonda. He loves the girls. That's what I'm worried about." Rhonda grabbed her arm, voice dropping to a whisper. "Listen to me. I've seen this before. Rich white men who get attached to black children, they start thinking they could give them a better life, better schools, better everything. And then they convince themselves the mother isn't good enough." "Rhonda, stop. I'm serious. Next thing you know, they're calling CPS, building a case, claiming you're unfit. They have lawyers, Doris, power, money, everything you don't have." Doris felt her chest tighten. "Jake would never. That's what they all think." Rhonda's eyes were fierce. "Until they lose everything. Be careful, please." After Rhonda left, Doris stood in the hallway for a long time, her sister's words replaying in her head like a warning she couldn't unhear. That night, she couldn't sleep. The seed had been planted, and once it was there, it started to grow. She began noticing things she hadn't paid attention to before. The way Jake asked detailed questions about the girls' preschool, whether they were learning enough, if the teachers were good. One afternoon, she walked past his office and heard him on the phone. "I'm looking into educational opportunities." "Yes, for young children." Her heart stopped. A few days later, she was dusting his desk and saw a business card partially hidden under some papers. "Dr. Sarah Chen, child psychologist, consultation services." Why would he need a child psychologist? She told herself she was being paranoid, that Rhonda had gotten into her head. But then she found documents in his study pages about family law, custody arrangements, legal guardianship. He'd printed them out, highlighted sections. Doris felt the walls closing in. She started pulling back, answering his questions with one word instead of full sentences, avoiding eye contact, keeping the girls closer, watching Jake more carefully when he was with them. He noticed. Of course he noticed. "Doris, did I do something wrong?" he asked one evening, confusion written all over his face. "Everything's fine, Mr. Lambert," she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. But it wasn't fine. Nothing was fine. The distance between them grew wider every day. The warmth disappeared. The easy conversations stopped. Doris would catch him looking at her with hurt in his eyes, but she couldn't explain. He couldn't tell him that she was terrified he was building a case to take her daughters away. 2 weeks later, she made her decision. She couldn't risk it, couldn't risk them. She walked into his office and placed an envelope on his desk. Her resignation letter. Jake looked up, stunned. "What is this? I need to find something else." "I'm sorry." "Why? Doris, what's going on?" She turned to leave, but he stood up, blocking her path. "Please," he said, his voice breaking. "Just tell me what happened. What did I do?" She wanted to scream, wanted to cry, wanted to tell him everything, the fear, the warnings, the documents she'd found. But instead, she just shook her head and walked out, leaving him standing there with her resignation in his hands and questions he'd never get answered. At least, not yet. Jake didn't accept the resignation. He showed up at her apartment building in Queens 2 days later, standing in the hallway outside her door, knocking gently. "Doris, please, just talk to me." She stood on the other side, with her hand pressed against the wood, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't open it. Couldn't open it. Inside, Ava started crying. "Mama, why can't we see Mr. Jake?" "Is that him?" Bella's voice, small and confused. "Mr. Jake's here." Doris closed her eyes, heartbreaking. "Please," Jake said through the door, his voice cracking. "I don't understand what I did wrong. Just tell me." But she stayed silent until she heard his footsteps fade down the hallway. For 3 days, she avoided him, took different routes, didn't answer her phone. But Queens wasn't that big, and Jake wasn't giving up. On the 4th day, he was waiting in her building's stairwell when she came home from a job interview. She turned to leave, but he stepped in front of her. "No," he said firmly. "You're going to tell me what's happening." And something inside Doris snapped. "You want to take them from me?" The words exploded out of her, months of fear and exhaustion finally breaking free. "Don't pretend you don't know what I'm talking about. I've seen it. The questions about their school, the psychologist's card on your desk, the custody law, documents you printed out." Jake's eyes went wide. "What? You think I'm stupid? You got close to them, made them love you, and now you're going to say I'm not good enough, that you can give them more, better schools, better life, and then you'll call someone, build a case, take them." "Doris, stop." His voice was sharp, almost angry. "Have you lost your mind? Then explain it." Her voice broke. "Explain why you're researching schools and talking to lawyers." "Because I wanted to help you." He ran his hand through his hair, looking desperate. "I thought maybe I could pay for a better preschool, maybe help with their education. I thought, God, Doris, I thought maybe you'd let me be their godfather or something. But I never, not once, thought about taking them from you." "Then why?" "Because you're their mother." His voice echoed in the stairwell. "Because they need you, not me. Because no amount of money or power could ever replace what you give them every single day." Doris felt her knees go weak. Jake took a shaky breath, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer, broken. "Do you want to know the real reason I care so much?" She couldn't speak, just nodded. "Because I fell in love with the 3 of you." The words came out raw, honest. "With Ava and Bella, yes. But with you, Doris. The way you fight for them, the way you love them, the way you make that penthouse feel like a home instead of a tomb. I fell in love, and I didn't know how to tell you." Silence. Doris stared at him, tears streaming down her face, and the truth came tumbling out before she could stop it. "I love you too." His head snapped up. "But I was terrified," she whispered. "You have everything, Jake. Power, money, lawyers, influence. And I have nothing. I clean houses for a living. I can barely afford rent. How was I supposed to believe you wouldn't wake up one day and realize you could do better for them without me?" Jake stepped forward and took her hands in his. "You have everything, Doris. You're their mother. You're the woman I love. You're the reason I started believing life could be good again." "I was so scared," she breathed. "I know." He pulled her close, and she let herself collapse against him. "I know." They stood there in that stairwell, holding each other, while the world kept spinning outside. And for the first time in weeks, Doris let herself breathe. Maybe this could work. Maybe, just maybe, they could build something real. She wanted to believe it so badly, it hurt. 2 weeks passed, and something fragile and beautiful began to grow between them. Doris went back to work, but everything was different now. Jake would find her in the kitchen and talk to her, really talk, not just polite employer small talk. He asked about her dreams, her childhood, what made her laugh. She told him things she'd never told anyone, about her mother who'd worked 3 jobs, about being hungry as a kid and swearing her daughters would never know that feeling. And he listened like every word mattered. They were careful around each other, testing the ground like it might break beneath them. But there were moments, his hand brushing hers when he handed her coffee, the way he'd smile when she walked into a room, the quiet conversations that stretched long into the evening after the girls had fallen asleep. Doris still insisted on working. "I don't want to depend on anyone," she told him firmly. "I need to take care of myself." "I know," he said softly. "That's one of the things I love about you." Things felt hopeful, gentle, new. And then Jake had to fly to London for business. 5 days, he said, kissing her forehead before he left. "I'll call every night. And I'm giving you full access to the whole penthouse, all of it. Make yourself at home." "We'll be fine," she assured him. "I'll bring the girls something special," he promised, ruffling Ava's hair. Bella wrapped her arms around his leg and didn't want to let go. The first 2 days went smoothly. Doris cleaned, played with the girls, and talked to Jake on the phone every evening. He sounded tired, but happy, asking about every little detail of their day. On the 3rd day, Doris was dusting the hallway at the far end of the penthouse when she noticed something she'd never seen before. A door. Locked. She'd worked here for 2 years and had never noticed this door. It wasn't hidden, exactly, but it blended into the wall in a way that made it easy to overlook. She tried the handle. Locked. Something about it bothered her. Why would one room be locked? What was he hiding? She told herself to leave it alone, to trust him, but Rhonda's voice crept back into her mind. "Be careful. Rich men with secrets." She searched the kitchen drawers and found a small key in a jar near the window. Her hands were shaking when she slid it into the lock. The door opened, and Doris staggered backward, hand over her mouth. It was a nursery, complete and perfect. Pink walls, 2 white cribs with delicate bedding, a rocking chair by the window, shelves lined with children's books, organized by size, a toy chest overflowing with unopened gifts, still in their packaging, stuffed animals arranged on a shelf, like they were waiting for someone, and on the wall, in elegant gold script, Ava and Bella, her daughters' names. The room spun. Doris gripped the doorframe to keep from falling. Rhonda was right. She'd been right all along. He'd been planning this, planning to take them. He'd even prepared their room. How long had this been here? How long had he been setting this up? The business trips, the legal documents, the questions about school. It all made sense now. He was building a case, preparing a home for them, getting everything ready to prove he could provide better. "How could I have been so stupid?" she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "How could I have believed him?" She didn't think, didn't call, didn't leave a note explaining. She just ran. She picked up Ava and Bella from preschool early, told them they were going on a trip. She packed everything they owned into 2 suitcases, clothes, toys, the few photographs she had. Her hands shook so badly she could barely zip the bags. She left 1 sentence on a piece of paper on the kitchen counter. "Don't try to find us." Then she took her daughters and disappeared. By nightfall, they were in a cheap motel room in Philadelphia. The girls were confused, asking questions she couldn't answer. "Where's Mr. Jake?" Ava asked, her little voice breaking. "Why did we leave?" Bella whispered. Doris pulled them close and cried until she had nothing left. She'd done it again. Let fear destroy something beautiful. But this time, she told herself, she'd done the right thing. She'd protected her daughters, even if it meant breaking all 3 of their hearts. Jake came home from London with gifts for the girls, a stuffed double-decker bus for Ava, a miniature Big Ben snow globe for Bella. He walked into the penthouse, calling their names, smiling, ready to tell them about his trip. The silence hit him first. Then he saw the note on the counter. "Don't try to find us." 4 words that destroyed him. He called her phone, disconnected. He went to her apartment in Queens. The landlord said she'd moved out 3 days ago, paid what she owed, and left no forwarding address. He stood in the empty hallway where they'd held each other just 2 weeks before, and something inside him shattered. He hired a private investigator, searched hospitals, shelters, schools. Nothing. Finally, desperate, he tracked down Rhonda. She opened her door and saw his face pale, eyes red and sunken, like he hadn't slept in days, and she almost felt sorry for him. "Where is she?" he asked, voice hoarse. "I don't know. Please." He was begging now. "I need to explain. She found something in my house, didn't she? The nursery." Rhonda's eyes narrowed. You prepared a room with her daughter's names in it, and you're surprised she ran. You don't understand. No, you don't understand. You should have been honest from the start. Now she's gone, and honestly, I think she made the right choice. Jake closed his eyes. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I never meant to hurt her. But Rhonda just shook her head and closed the door. 3 weeks. That's how long Doris lasted in Philadelphia before the money started running out. The motel room was $40 a night cheap, but it added up fast. She'd found work cleaning offices at minimum wage, but it barely covered food and rent. The bills were piling up, her savings were nearly gone. But worse than the money was watching her daughters fade. Ava stopped singing. Bella barely spoke. They asked for Mr. Jake every single day, their little voices getting quieter each time, like they were giving up hope of ever seeing him again. When can we go home, Mama? Ava asked one night, curled up on the worn motel bed. Doris didn't know how to answer. She didn't know where home was anymore. At night, when the girls finally fell asleep, Doris would lie awake staring at the ceiling, and a voice in her head wouldn't stop whispering, "What if you made a mistake?" She remembered the way Jake had looked at her daughters, not with greed or calculation, but with pure love. The way he'd gotten down on the floor with them every single day, even when he was exhausted from work. The way he'd cried when he first met them. 4 years old, he'd whispered. Why had that broken him so completely? The nursery, the names on the wall. There had to be more to it, but she'd been too afraid to ask, too afraid to trust. Maybe Carolina planted a fear that didn't exist, she thought. But then she'd remember the locked room, and the fear would flood back. 1 month after she'd fled, Doris was walking back from the corner store with a bag of groceries when a black BMW pulled up to the curb. Her heart stopped. Jake got out of the car, and she barely recognized him. He'd aged 10 years in 4 weeks. His eyes were hollow, his face gaunt, his shoulders slumped like he was carrying the weight of the world. "Doris," he said quietly, "please, just let me explain." She tried to walk past him, but he stepped in front of her, not threatening, just desperate. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, and his voice was so broken it made her chest ache. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Just let me tell you the truth." She looked at him really, looked at him and saw something in his eyes that made her stop. Not anger, not manipulation, just pain. Deep, unbearable pain. "There's a coffee shop across the street," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Please." Against every instinct screaming at her to run, against every warning Rhonda had ever given her, Doris nodded. 5 minutes, she said. That's all. They sat in a corner booth at the coffee shop, as far from other people as they could get. Jake's hands trembled as he held his cup. Doris sat across from him, arms crossed, guarded. "You have 5 minutes," she said. "Talk." Jake closed his eyes and took a breath so deep it looked like it hurt. 4 years ago, he began, voice barely steady, "I was married to a woman named Emma." Doris felt something shift in her chest, but she stayed quiet. "We were happy, really, truly happy. The kind of happiness I didn't think was real until I met her." He smiled, but it was sad, distant. "She got pregnant with twins. We were over the moon. We picked out names together, painted the nursery ourselves, stayed up late, reading parenting books and laughing at how unprepared we were." His voice cracked. He stopped, steadied himself. "We chose the names Ava and Bella." Doris's breath caught. The due date was November 27th. Emma went into labor that morning, and we rushed to the hospital. We were so excited. Scared, but excited. He paused, staring down at his coffee like he could see it all playing out in the dark liquid. But there were complications. Things went wrong fast. They tried everything, emergency C-section, transfusions, everything. But he couldn't finish. Didn't need to. "Emma didn't make it," he whispered, "and neither did our daughters. I lost all 3 of them in one night." Doris felt tears streaming down her face before she even realized she was crying. "I couldn't go into the nursery after that," Jake continued. "Couldn't even look at the door. I locked it and threw away the key. For 4 years, that room stayed sealed. I'd walk past it every day and pretend it didn't exist. Pretend I hadn't lost everything that mattered." He looked up at her now, eyes red and broken. "And then I met your daughters, November 27th, their 4th birthday, and one of them looked up at me and said, 'I'm Ava,' and the other said, 'I'm Bella,' the exact names Emma and I had chosen." on the exact day I'd lost my family. "Oh God," Doris whispered, covering her mouth. "I wasn't planning to steal your daughters, Doris." His voice broke completely now. "I was finally able to open that door again because of them. They gave me life again, hope again. For the first time in 4 years, I didn't feel like I was drowning." He reached across the table, but didn't touch her, just let his hand rest there, open, offering. "I thought maybe I could transform that space of grief into something beautiful. Prepare it for the family I dreamed of building with you. It was supposed to be a surprise, a way of showing you I was serious, that I wanted a future with all 3 of you." "I was so wrong," Doris choked out. "Jake, I'm so sorry. You weren't wrong to be afraid," he said gently. "You were protecting your daughters. I understand that. But I need you to understand something too." He leaned forward, and when he spoke, his voice was raw with truth. "I didn't want to replace Emma and my daughters. I wanted to honor their memory by loving again, by being the father I never got to be. With you. Together. As a family." Tears streamed down his face now. "But if you don't want that, I understand. Just please, don't keep Ava and Bella from me. Let me be in their lives, even if it's just visits. Even if it's just—" "I want that family too," Doris interrupted, her voice shaking. "I want you. I was just so scared of losing them that I destroyed the one thing that made all of us happy." They reached for each other at the same time, meeting in the middle of that table, holding hands like lifelines. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "So am I." And in that small coffee shop in Philadelphia, 2 broken people began to heal. That evening, Doris brought Jake back to the motel. When she opened the door, Ava and Bella were sitting on the bed watching cartoons. They looked up, and time stopped. "Mr. Jake," they screamed and launched themselves off the bed, running so fast they nearly tripped over each other. They threw their arms around him, and Jake dropped to his knees, pulling them close, his whole body shaking. "I missed you," he whispered into their hair. "I missed you both so much." "We thought you left us," Bella said, her little voice muffled against his chest. "Never," he said fiercely. "I will never leave you. I promise." Doris watched from the doorway, tears streaming down her face, and felt something settle in her chest. This was real. This was right. 3 days later, they moved back into the penthouse. Jake insisted Doris didn't have to work anymore, but she refused. "Not yet," she said. "Let me do this my way." "Okay," he said softly. "Whatever you need." That first night back, after the girls had fallen asleep in the guest room, Jake took Doris's hand. "There's something I need to show you," he said quietly. "If you're ready." She knew what he meant. They walked down the hallway together, and he opened the door to the nursery. Doris stepped inside, but this time, she saw it differently. "This rocking chair," Jake said, his voice gentle, "was Emma's. Her grandmother gave it to her when she found out she was pregnant. She used to sit here and read to her belly, talking to the babies like they could already hear her." He picked up a soft blue blanket from one of the cribs. "I bought this the day we found out we were having twins," Emma cried, happy tears for an hour. Doris listened, heartbreaking and healing at the same time. "When I met Ava and Bella," Jake continued, "it was like God gave me a second chance at the family I'd grieved for. Not to replace what I lost, never that, but to honor Emma's memory by loving again, by opening my heart when I thought it was dead forever." He turned to Doris, taking both her hands. "This room wasn't a threat. It was a shrine I'd been able to open again because your daughters brought light back into my life. Because you brought light back into my life." Doris stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. "I understand now," she whispered. "I'm so sorry I didn't see it before." "You were protecting them," he said, holding her close. "That's what good mothers do." They stood there in that room, surrounded by memories of the past and hopes for the future, and Doris finally let herself believe. Believe in second chances. Believe in healing. Believe that sometimes, when everything falls apart, God puts the pieces back together in a way more beautiful than you ever imagined. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Jake pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "Now," he said, smiling through tears, "we build something new, together," and for the first time in a long time, Doris wasn't afraid. She was ready. 8 months later, Doris stood in a small room at the edge of Central Park, looking at herself in the mirror. She was wearing a simple white dress, nothing fancy, nothing she couldn't afford on her own, because that mattered to her. Her hair was pulled back softly, and in her hands she held a small bouquet of wildflowers. Rhonda stood behind her, fixing her veil, tears already streaming down her face. "I was wrong about him," Rhonda whispered. "I'm sorry I scared you." "You were protecting me," Doris said, squeezing her sister's hand. "That's what family does." Outside, under a canopy of trees with the city humming quietly in the distance, Jake Lambert stood waiting. He wore a simple suit, no tie, and when Doris walked toward him with Ava and Bella as her flower girls in white dresses with red bows, his face broke into the kind of smile that makes you believe in miracles. The ceremony was short. Just a few close friends, a minister who spoke about second chances and the kind of love that heals old wounds. When Jake said, "I do," his voice cracked. When Doris said it back, she meant it with every piece of her heart. And when the minister said, "You may kiss your bride," Jake pulled her close and whispered, "Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for not giving up," she whispered back. The reception was at the penthouse, but it didn't look like the cold, empty place Doris had first walked into years ago. Now the walls were covered with photographs Ava and Bella at the park, family dinners, birthdays, ordinary moments that meant everything. The refrigerator was cluttered with crayon drawings held up by magnets. Toys were scattered in corners. Laughter filled the rooms. It was alive. As the evening wound down and the last guests left, Doris found Jake sitting on the couch, looking tired but happy. The girls had changed into their pajamas and were eating leftover cake at the coffee table, their faces covered in frosting. Bella set down her fork, climbed into Jake's lap, and looked up at him with those big brown eyes. "Daddy," she said, her voice small and sweet, "can we have cake for breakfast tomorrow?" Everything stopped. Jake froze. Doris froze. It was the first time either girl had called him that. Ava's head snapped up, and she scrambled over, climbing onto his other knee. "Please, Daddy?" Jake looked at Doris, and tears were streaming down his face, the kind of tears that come from a place so deep you didn't know it existed. Doris nodded, crying too, her hand over her heart. "Yes, my girls," Jake whispered, pulling them both close. "We can have cake whenever you want." He held them like that for a long time, and Doris watched, knowing she was witnessing something sacred. A man who'd lost everything, finding a family he never thought he'd be allowed to have. Two little girls who'd never had a father, learning what it felt like to be cherished. A woman who'd been afraid to trust, discovering that some people really do stay. Later that night, after the girls had fallen asleep in their room, the nursery, transformed now into a space full of life and laughter and love. Doris and Jake stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. "Emma would have loved them," Jake said softly. "I think she'd be happy you found your way back," Doris whispered. He pulled her close. "Every year on November 27th, I used to dread waking up. It was the worst day of my life. And now?" He smiled. "Now, it's the day I celebrate two little girls who taught me that love doesn't replace what you've lost. It makes room for something new, something just as precious." Doris rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, steady and sure, and she thought about grace, how it shows up in the last place you expect, how it takes broken people and broken stories and weaves them into something beautiful. How God doesn't always heal the way you think he will. Sometimes he brings you something entirely different, entirely better. Family isn't about blood, she realized. It's about who stays, who chooses you, who loves you even when it's hard, even when it's messy, even when it hurts. And every year after that, on November 27th, Jake Lambert knelt on the living room floor with a birthday cake, singing off-key, while Ava and Bella clapped and laughed and called him Daddy, transforming the worst day of his life into the most beautiful one. Because that's what love does. It redeems, it heals, it makes all things new. And sometimes, if you're brave enough to trust it, it gives you a second chance at the family you thought you'd lost forever.